It's Jen Sey. I am one of the producers of Athlete A, and I'm a former gymnast, an elite gymnast in the 1980s. And I'm going to talk, here he is, with Dave Tilley. I'm going to let him introduce himself. There
Hello.
you are.
What's going on? That was easy. No problem at all.
That was easy. You were very on time. Sometimes I'm left hanging there talking to myself for a while.
Yeah, killing time. How are you? How are your holidays?
Oh, hanging in there. How about you?
Same. Virtual family dinner,
Yeah.
But it's all good. Yeah.
Well, it's really lovely to meet you. Thank you for
as well.
to talk with me.
Yeah, I'm a big fan.
Oh, that's kind. Well, we're a fan of what you're doing. So before we start, if you could just introduce yourself. I was about to, but you got on the phone so quickly, I didn't need to. So just tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so I always start, I was a gymnast. I went up and competed through level 10 and then competed at Springfield College in the men's program. So started coaching when I was 15, kind of traditionally how everyone else does, like just junior coach and for fun and kind of got my chops. My coach was amazing. I had a great coach growing up, and so followed his footsteps. And then after competing, got my doctorate in physical therapy and then a sports board certification, so 2-year postdoctoral work, and then a strength conditioning degree. And so since 2013, I've been coaching and working as a medical provider. I probably treat about 75% gymnasts in my clinic, anywhere from younger all the way to the elite level. And then I started a company called Shift to try to help educate and stuff like that. So fortunate that it's been traveling more and stuff like that. So we run research. I'm a geek. I'm a big geek, but still coaching every day and stuff like that.
I love a geek. That's my favorite kind of person.
Yeah.
So I feel like a lot of what you do is to sort of bring more science to the sport, because the sport is devoid of it in many ways. And I think that so much of how it is coached, it's so old fashioned. I mean, so many other sports are so scientific in the way they approach training.
Sure.
And athlete rehabilitation, and gymnastics just has this sort of very old school mentality. You just go through it and you work through the pain. I mean, that was my experience in the 80s. And from all the young athletes I've met, it doesn't seem to have changed at all. So can you talk a little bit about some of the myths in gymnastics?
Yeah.
I know for myself, I'll just sort of tee one up. There was this myth that you could literally never take a day off. I mean, I trained 6 days a week, like that was the worst thing you could do. And for every day off, it took, 2 to 3 days to get back where you were. Where does that come from? That's not true in any other sport.
Yeah. The first part to your question is, why do we maybe not have sciences? I can speak to this too, is when I was a younger coach, there was no formal credentialing or education. I literally walked into my gym and I was like, I'd like to make some money and coach. And they gave me a class to teach. And I was like, okay, sure. So like, that's a huge problem that I think underlies a lot of this. And it took me maybe 7 or 8 years of coaching and doing stuff to realize I'm an idiot and I don't know anything. And I started hanging out with, I'm really fortunate that I have really good mentors in the medical world. Like my bosses work with professional baseball and are really good. So when I was around them, I was like, I've never heard any of this stuff about strength and conditioning or medical injuries or science. And it started to make me scratch my head. And a really good friend of mine, Dave Tilley, was a 2008 Olympian. And he started a camp that had a lot of really smart people there. And so I learned a lot from them. And then I realized, 1, I don't know enough. 2, I have a huge ego. And 3, that the girls I'm coaching and some of my coworkers don't like being around me because I'm a little bit of a monster sometimes. So that was my big change in like 2014. But I think the myth that you're talking about of the no days off stuff like that comes from what I just said, which is there's no scientific peer-reviewed crosstalk. It's an echo chamber, right? And so I've experienced this as an athlete myself. And then earlier in my career, I was fortunate to travel a lot and speak with not only people in the US, but also in other countries. And when you really ask people, why do you do this? Like, give me a good rationale for this. It's like, well, this is what works for this person, or this worked for this gym, or this was it. And for some things, that's okay. Technique, right? Like your Chanko technique or something. But for 90% of the rest of gymnastics with strength and conditioning, nutrition, recovery, all that stuff, you should go to peer-reviewed literature and you should have a board of people following. That's what medical science does. That's why we know when you have an injury, how to treat you, right? And so that's a huge glaring problem that has to be fixed in gymnastics. And I think until that fixes, there's no way out. But there's literally no science to support not taking any days off, and especially like not having a relative off season after championships, right? Or using that. And I'm lucky to have some friends that are at that level, and they're like, I feel the best I've ever felt after the coronavirus, break.
Because they've had a break.
Exactly. So we're seeing it change. Yeah.
I think I mean, even you walking in the gym and saying you want to coach, you had experience as a gymnast, which is a lot more than some. I mean, my
True.
coaches were never even gymnasts. They
Nor
just
was
said,
mine.
open a gym.
Yep.
And so there's just there's no relatability to what it feels like. I mean, forget about the injuries, but just sort of how to mentally understand the sport and get yourself to, it's like their ability to remove themselves from that, I think they think makes them better, but it's just such a lack of understanding.
There's no empathy.
But back to the training and the injuries and all of this, it does seem to me like in professional sports, for instance, and, you know, I observe Bay Area sports closely and I'm a fan, and, you know, Steve Kerr is probably one of the best coaches there is. It's like in professional sports, that doesn't seem to be the case. And I wonder, is it because they've spent so much money investing in these athletes that they want to make sure they have a vested interest in making sure they come back from injuries? Whereas I don't know if these coaches really care. The kids come back, because there's another one in their place.
Sure. Yeah. It's funny that we're talking about this now. We treat a lot of professional baseball players at our clinic, and I was talking with one today about this discussion, and he was having the exact same thing. He was like, you know, he has a 9-year-old kid, right? And he's very talented. His kid's very talented. And they're like, coaches want him already and scouts and this and that. And he's like, absolutely not. He's like, as a parent, as a coach, I have a vested interest because maybe it's money, maybe it's the long-term health. Maybe they understand this is a long-term game. They're much more careful with how they treat these kids growing up. And I'm fortunate, again, that my bosses literally wrote the research for like Tommy John and youth baseball injuries. So that's what we're using as our model. But, you know, unfortunately, I think that there's two sides to the same coin. One is that there were so many amazing coaches who wanted to do the right thing in the 80s and 90s and speak up, and they all got pushed to the side and blackballed. And that happened with a lot of my friends who were medical providers. They went to congresses, they tried to speak up and say, you know, like Dr. Sands wrote this article in 2000 about gymnasts lifting weights. Why shouldn't we do this? Or medical injury stuff. And everyone's like, we don't need that. Like, that's all rubbish, like whatever. And it's like, yeah, well, 20 people in a peer-reviewed study think it's a pretty good thing, and every other sport does it. Like, gymnastics is unique, not different. We have the same anatomy, same physiology, and anything from nutrition to energy systems and cardio to strength conditioning to injuries is all the same. Like, you don't heal faster because you're a gymnast. This is not how it works.
No. Yeah. And I mean, I think it does start with sort of actually caring about the person.
Totally.
I feel like, I mean, I had a lot of injuries. It's a dangerous sport. I would say that is the one sort of difference from not all other sports, but many. And there are more injuries. And the athletes are younger, which I don't know if that has any sort of bearing on healing. Perhaps you heal faster when you're younger. I don't know. But none of that is taken into account. I mean, every time I broke an ankle or a bone, the cast came off many days early, if not weeks early. And I started training when it was already broken and when it was still broken. And then I just broke the other side.
Yeah. That's a classic example of people who are so far outside their scope. It's ridiculous, right? Like, and I still struggle with this too, not into the same degree, but like sometimes there's people who push back on me in terms of like recommendations I make. So I had someone once tell me that the best MRI machine in Boston was wrong, and that fracture really wasn't there. A coach said that to me, and I was like, yes, the $50,000 imaging study is wrong, right? And it's just like people who are maybe insecure, and I was like this as a coach. Like when I had a big ego, like I didn't want to be proven wrong. I wanted to be the man, and so I had a big ego, and I never was that brash about it. But I think that's what happens is people get insecure and they get a little fearful about, you know, the perfect opportunity going away. Instead, they start bending the rules a little bit. But the first point is like when somebody makes an against medal, that's why we need an interdisciplinary team of people caring for the athlete. But I feel this way when I coach too, right? Like if someone has a sore ankle and we're talking about flipping a vault, I have to take a step back and say like, am I trying to have this athlete flip this big skill because it shows on me as a coach and I'm tying my self-worth to the athlete, or is it because I generally care about them, right? And that's the problem. When you tie your sense of self-worth to your athletes and their accomplishments, you can't make clear decisions. And so that was a huge revelation for me. It was like, I have to get my self-esteem and my happiness, not from how well my athletes do and how many level 10s we have, but like just being a good person, you know?
That requires a degree of introspection that I worry isn't really available to many. I also am struck by, and I don't think I came to understand this till I was much older, like maybe 10 years ago. I didn't understand, and I don't think most coaches understand the long-term repercussions of training on really serious injury. You know, the way my mind thought about it was, yes, this really hurts a lot right now, but when I'm done training, it will be fine. Like I didn't understand that if you train on a broken ankle, when you're 40, you're going to have grade 4 arthritis and need an ankle. Would that make a difference if people understood that? I don't know.
Yeah, I think, and this is something I've seen actually happen more now, is there's when someone makes a true change, either they have an amazing role model to follow or they have a really terrible example that makes it hurt personally to them. And I think I've seen some coaches who are living with some very painful moments of regret right now because their athletes don't want to come back to the gym, or their athletes have these long-term ankle issues or back issues, right? Like hearing that one of your gymnasts possibly has nerve damage in her spine because you didn't take care of her fracture when it was younger. And like they say when they're 30, they're having problems having kids. That hits you at a level that you can't even comprehend. And I think, unfortunately, I wish it doesn't take such tragedy to get people to change sometimes, but I'm having some really harsh conversations with people in the clinic now these times about, like, I used to dance on these issues and be like, nah, we'll be okay. But now I'm like, listen, I've seen this show before. I know how it ends. And as someone who's been there with a back problem and many shoulder problems, like, I have athletes who are now in their 30s that I've worked with like, you know, or their parents are telling me that they're really struggling. So it doesn't always happen. But at the same time, like, as a coach, you have to think, what's the next implication of this right away? What's in 2 weeks? What's in 2 months, 2 years, and 20 years? How does this decision I make right now impact that whole timeline?
Yeah. And I think some of them really don't know and don't understand. And I think many of them, even when because there are gyms that are sort of known for having young athletes that are overtrained and are very promising, but then don't quite make it. And it happens repeatedly. And they somehow don't still have the introspection that you described to say, if I'd done things differently. So I worry a bit that the culture is such that the science won't even matter, that it's like what you were saying, you know, that MRI machine is wrong. I'm right. I know.
Yeah. And I think
don't know what we do about that. What do
that's
we do?
A situation where the 10, whatever percentage it is of people that are really won't hear an alternative opinion or refuse to admit that they have a role to play or anything, they have to be removed. Like, this is the role of clubs to fire those people. This is the role of NGBs. This is the role of peer pressure, positive peer pressure. Because my gut instinct, and maybe we have different views, I think most coaches in here, like, are decent people who want to do the right thing. They're not these holistic, like, monstrous people who want to coach kids. You know?
I agree with that.
But I think that, unfortunately, those people try to speak up and they get pushed aside and made fun of because it's not what the norm is. And I think that's what the 80s and 90s showed us, was like that coaching style just like was, quote, successful, and it wasn't, right? We hear about all these things that are really the whiplash, but people want to change those ideas, but they get so much pressure. So the people who are doing the wrong thing should be removed and held accountable. And then from there, it takes everybody admitting how much we've messed it up and saying we really need a better model, which is where everyone has to swallow their pride for a couple of years and admit we're not going to be successful to fix this thing.
It must be changed this. Yeah. No, I don't in my heart of hearts believe these are bad people. I think that they've seen one way of doing it and they're inculcated in that. And many have been doing it for 50 years. I mean, there's coaches who literally, and so it's impossible to see another way.
Yeah.
And then I think you're right. And a lot of coaches write to me and come to me. A lot of them see it and are afraid to say anything because they feel then they're speaking out against their community coaches.
And there's enormous, I mean, I've never seen something more comparable to like a 7th grade lunchroom than sometimes a gym that I've been in that's so gossipy, right? Like, it's like this weird psychological warfare of gossip behind people's backs and coaches talking and this and that. Like, if you're a new coach and you're trying to get your teeth chopped and you're trying to speak up about new science you learned or stuff, and you get completely crapped on, you're not going to want to say anything. And I think that's really hard for people to kind of, it's hard, but you have to find a gym where the leader is open to hearing what you have to say. I'm really lucky. I left at JO Gyms because of that. I work at a YMCA for the last 8 years that has a club team inside of it. We do both. And my boss is amazing and tells me when I need to say the wrong thing, or also listens to these ideas. And that's so hard to find a leader who really will, admit something that needs to change.
Yeah, I mean, these coaches get it. They are trying to build their own careers, and I've talked to quite a few who have had Olympic gymnasts. I won't name any names because they told me in confidence, but they told me that, at the national team training camps at Karoli Ranch, they had to be meaner or pretend to be meaner than they were so that they could fit in and get sort of kudos, get sort of a pat on the back from the sort of leadership at USAG.
Sure.
Even if they were quote unquote nicer or more supportive at home, they couldn't behave that way at training camp because their athlete would be punished, which is, it's not as bad as as the other kind, but it's still, at the end of the day, these are kids and we have to stand up for them.
Yeah. I've heard that echoed.
Yeah. I wonder how do you, another aspect of the sport, in women's anyway, that is particularly damaging is obviously issues around eating and eating disorders. And I wrote about this in my book, and everybody said, oh, it's changed. It's not like that anymore. And, I've met so many athletes over the decades. I now am very grateful to call athletes friends that literally just retired yesterday and, across all the decades. And every single one I talk to comes out with some sort of disordered eating or body dysmorphia. And so I don't believe at all that it's changed.
Yeah.
And I wonder, one, how does that disordered behavior around eating and nutrition contribute to injuries in your mind? Because I would imagine it does.
Oh my gosh, yeah, absolutely. And one is this is the clearest example of when someone who doesn't know what they're talking about and isn't licensed to profession should never even have this conversation like this. And the thought that it's gone away is complete garbage, because I talk to people every single day that are still struggling that last week with this issue, myself when I was in college included. So it's definitely still a real issue.
Yeah.
But I think this is a situation where, number one, like, people have this misunderstanding in our sport that the equation for progress is work plus work plus work equals progress, right? And there's literally no literature to support that in any scientific journal ever, right? It's the optimal dose of work plus the optimal dose of recovery that equals progress, and that equals
They think
time.
it's work plus work minus food.
Yeah, right, exactly. And this is what happened, is that, like, I think what people lack in education, they make up for in intensity, or they bend the rules and do something unethical. And so someone's not making progress, they're not getting skills, and the person who's not trained and has the wrong moral intent blames it on the athlete and says, well, it's because you're too heavy. If you just lost some weight, you'd catch your Tkachev. And one, in that moment, the person standing next to them should be like, that is the worst thing I've ever heard, and you need to leave right now, right? But in the second part of it is that if you don't have the skill set to get proper strength and conditioning and proper flexibility and proper, cardio energy systems, if you don't know these are entire fields of study. People spend their entire life studying these things. And if you don't have the knowledge to do it, you can't make up a reason why someone is not going to be successful and pin it on nutrition. Like, one comment can make somebody spiral into darkness. And I think that coaches need to really understand the gravity of that. But I think it's because we don't have that education or use nutritionists, or are willing to honestly listen to the hard facts sometimes and the truth, that people don't have good nutrition. And it's a huge impact on nutrition. How do you think new tissues and new bones grow? It's nutrients and water and sleep and time. The four most basic things you need are a proper training program with good periodization and time between workouts, recovery, nutrition, hydration, and proper, sleep. And Dr. Sands said this. He was the head OTC recovery expert way back in the day in 2000, wrote an article on this, and it was completely ignored by everybody. Or they tried to change it, but none of the national team or people wanted to adopt it fully, because we know there were alternative motives. Well, that doesn't line up with our agenda of we need to win, so they pushed it to the side.
It's so maddening to me, because all of the things you're talking about, proper healing, proper conditioning, proper nutrition, would lead to better results. Like, I don't know why the sport has convinced itself that it doesn't line up with winning, when it would actually produce better results, and you'd have more longevity from these great athletes. And there's so many great ones that we lose because of either injuries or eating disorders or psychological trauma from both of those things and more. And so I feel like beating my head against the wall. I don't understand why, and so much of it, the eating disorder thing and the weight thing is like, it's this accepted aesthetic. I mean, they argue that you have to be lighter, but I think it's more driven by aesthetics than anything, even though I don't know that the sport and the coaches are willing to admit it. It's like, this is what a successful gymnast looks like.
Yeah. No, I would completely agree. I completely agree. And I think when I listened to 30 for 30 podcast, and it really opened my eyes. I had to listen to those on really long runs because I was getting so pissed off. But when I listened to what was going on with some of those motives about why are we saying 12 is when we got to push really hard? Why so small? Why? And there was
there's no reason.
Evidence at all. Like, oh, it's better to spot. Like, okay, better to control. That's what you meant. Or better to push around, right? And not everyone was doing this. And I think there are people who are trying to push uphill against the grain, but that is a mountain to push uphill against when the system is trying to say no, no, no. And now we all know why maybe that was the incentive. But there's nothing to support that a tinier, underfed, lighter gymnast is going to tolerate. The forces are 15 times your body weight on floor when you tumble. It's an equation. And if you're not well fed and well rested and well trained, you're going to fall apart. You know what I mean? And then it goes like that, and they blame you're not trying hard enough. You're not working hard enough, blah, blah, blah. And frankly, it's all crap.
I mean, that creates the trauma, which I sort of explained in the, you think you're working really hard. You're told you're a lazy piece of garbage. You think your ankle hurts and you're told you're lazy. You think that you're starving and you're told that you're fat. And then you're upside down psychologically because
Yeah.
you trust your own perception of the world anymore.
Oh yeah.
And it's so damaging to enter and disorienting to enter the world that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
The eating disorder piece also, I think, like the injuries, I thought would be contained to the gym, you know, and once I left and I just didn't tumble on my ankle anymore, it'd be fine. I thought once I'm not weighed in twice a day and told to lose weight by any means necessary, I'll just go out and be a normal person and think normally about my body. But
no,
that does not happen.
Not at all.
I mean, I'm sure you've seen the lasting impacts of this. It's a very difficult recovery. Yes.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that this is something that's really hard is that like on the medical side, because of HIPAA, I don't like to share any of the people I work with or all that stuff. But like, if someone could be a fly in the wall for some of the stories that people come to me with their post gymnastics, they're like junior, seniors in college after an elite career or something like that. And it's like, I have trouble putting my pants on. I have trouble like, you know, going to the bathroom. I have issues with that. It's like, I'm scared to have a kid down the road because of what I went through the last 10 years. And they're like, really, like the parents are almost in tears. Like, was this worth it? You know what I mean? Like, especially the pursuit of a scholarship sometimes is like, is the collateral damage worth what we're going on? Because now I don't like my body. I don't like the relationship with food. I'm scared to do this. Like it really, it plagues their entire life. And it's not everybody, right? But it's a huge problem we're not talking about. And the research does not reflect it. I want to be clear about that, that like no one's going to report how injured they were and how they had eating disorders on a survey, especially if they know people are watching. So all the statistics on injuries and stuff are wildly underrated in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. It feels sort of, it just feels insurmountable sometimes. Why doesn't
it feels hopeless at times?
It does. I mean, I just keep talking about it because the more people at least understand it, then you have a new start line where, you know, when I started talking about these things, I was one of the only ones, if not the only one. And I was just sort of dismissed as a liar. At least now people are watching this conversation and they're saying, yes, yes, yes. People are watching the film and they're saying, yes, that's what it's like. People are coming to you for help. So it's at least part of the community is believing and wanting change. I mean, we need more because there's still a lot of parents, sadly, who are willing to send their kids to coaches that are abusive. There's parents willing to sort of let their kids train and kids willing to train on broken bones. I mean, I don't blame the child. She doesn't know any better. She's trying to please her coach. You know, she's told this is the best thing, but there's definitely more people now. What do you think is what is going to sort of instigate the change? Like, I feel like the progress is more people believe change needs to happen, but there's still not widespread change.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be right there with you, right? Like, I came out of school in like 2013. I finished my doctorate, and I was like a Spitfire, ready to go change the world. And then my dreams were crushed, right? And I realized how hard it was. And then I lost a lot of hope in 2016 too, especially. Like, I was like, there's no way. And I was ready to drop it and like go join another like field of study altogether in terms of sports medicine. And but as things did get worse and worse, people started like saying things finally and speaking up and maybe listening. And I had a lot more people emailing me or DMing me like, wow, I listened to your podcast, or I watched Athlete A, and it hit me at a visceral level that I can't believe how much I need to change. And people are really more open to the idea of change right now, which is the first step. But practically for me, I think there's a couple things. One is, like I said, overhauling the education system is mandatory. You either change or you leave. That's where we're at right now. Change and learn, or be willing to work on a team and hear some harsh words, or it's time to move on. And I think I've seen some people do both, but that's one. Number two is I think that we really need to hold each other accountable in terms of peer-to-peer pressure, like at a meet when someone's yelling at a kid.
I agree with that.
You know what I mean? That's a huge one. And like, I sit in a lot of rooms with different people at the same time, like consulting work I'm with like the head coach and the ATs and the medical staff, and everyone's pointing across the table. I'm like, guys, everyone has a role to play in this. We all screwed up. No one's not at fault here. So like, that's a big part of it. I think it has to be interdisciplinary care. And I actually want to say that there are some people in new positions here in the US and other countries I've worked with that are really doing the right work. And I'm proud of that, to say that, you know, there are some people that I'm like, wow, you give me hope. Like, you are someone who I think can do it. So like, that makes me more inspired to do it. And then we're lucky to have the internet and social media and podcasts and your film and books and stuff where people can find real things to do, because I don't think they're getting the education they need, but they can get a little bit from me and a little bit from you and a little bit from like Nick Ruddick and a little bit from Amy or someone like that, and they feel ready to change. But once people realize like I messed up and they deal with their own fears and insecurities and they're not afraid of change, then they'll like, okay, I'm ready to do it. And I see that happening slowly, but we still have a lot of work to do on like the real holding people accountable and real litigation and real like put your money where your mouth is.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think, look, there's been some progress in holding sexual predators accountable. I still think that the emotional and physical abuse
Totally.
is considered a bit of gray area, you know?
Yep.
And safe sport, you know, isn't quite handling those, you know,
Yep.
those claims all that well, whether they're overburdened or just don't see that as abuse. But it sounds like you have hope, though. I guess I'm going to ask you to leave us with a little bit of hope because you're seeing progress.
I didn't in 2016. I'll be frankly honest. I was gonna hang it all up, and I almost just sold my company. I was like, I'm done. I'm good with this, you know. But the athletes give me hope. I do a lot of my work for the athletes because I see the 17-year-old who comes to me with a hip surgery that has a college scholarship on the line, and their coach is actually ready to do whatever is necessary to get them back. And I'm there, and they actually go on to have an incredibly successful career in college. And like the experience they have when they come back and they're working out at our facility is so heartwarming. And like I still coach a bunch of girls at my gym that I'm like, man, we're making a positive dent in your life. And I think that's there. But also, there's a lot of coaches that give me hope. Like Nick Ruddick is a perfect example. Like him and I he's a really good friend of mine, and he was on the same dark spiral path, but he changed a lot and he's made a big impact. So I think there are coaches out there that are really doing the hard work silently. And that's the last thing I think we really need to do is not only we do need to hold those who are doing something wrong accountable, but there are good people who we need to be like, listen to them. They're doing the right thing. And that gives other people hope, because we know at the national level, it's a trickle down. If it's negative and toxic and miserable, the clubs are like that. So if we get people who are positive and inspiring and do the right thing, the clubs change as well. And so I think that's really important. But I have a little bit more hope.
But yeah, culture change is really hard. But I think if leadership at the NGB level, at the gym level, held up those coaches who were examples of positive coaching, who supported their kids, you know, mind and body, and we celebrated those coaches instead of the ones who are often celebrated that are that's absolutely what needs to happen, and I'm grateful you've continued. Thank you.
I'm happy to do it. And then also I think we need to give coaches on the ground in the trenches who want to do the right thing tools to solve their problems, right? Working with 13, 15-year-olds is challenging sometimes, and we need to give them real science-based ways to help those kids. So
yeah, it is challenging. I know that as a parent.
Coaching is my parenting right now.
Yeah, well, good luck when you have kids. It's challenging. It's hard, and not every kid is the same. You have to treat every child differently. You know, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've, you know, turned to books to kind of help me figure out what's the best way with this particular child.
I'm with you.
It was more of that. Well, I am really grateful to have this chance to talk to you, and I'm very grateful, as I'm sure the whole community is, for the work that you're doing. And we're glad you didn't quit, and that you're setting a new model of introspection and action.
It goes both ways. I'm appreciative of your work, and I was greatly inspired by the film. It gave me a good bump in work ethic. So I appreciate all you've done.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining me today.
No problem, Jen. Have a good night.
Bye, Dave.